Well, hey, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to After the Amen, which is our newest podcast segment here at Frankenmuth Bible Church. I'm joined with Nate this morning, and you're kind of more the host for this podcast today. But just a reminder for people, this is our opportunity to take the content from Sunday morning and take a little bit of a deeper dive. And so, Nate, good to have you back, man.
Thanks. I'm excited to be back, and I am really excited to be on the other side of the questions this time.
Oh, there you go.
So this is going to be great because I get to.
Yes, how the turntables.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
All right.
Yeah. So we're excited though. We're going to be able to spend a little time breaking down your message from this past Sunday. So that's really exciting. You ready to jump in a little bit?
Sure. Let's make it happen, man.
So I think before we jump completely there, you asked me last week about this idea of how I kind of got started preaching because I'm not an employee of the church. I just preach here and there. But I think it might be cool, even though people know you a little bit more and you have a pretty consistent voice in our pulpit here at FBC. But let's hear a little bit about your story. How did you get started preaching? When did that happen? And just tell us a little bit about how you got into it.
Yeah, so my journey into preaching happened, it was in my early 20s. Now, there's kind of a backstory for that. I started teaching a Bible study when I was 19 with some of my friends that kind of were what gave me the impetus to begin to lean into ministry and preaching and some of those things. So I had that experience. I think technically the first time I ever preached was actually probably an open air, like an outdoor sermon, like on the street when I was in England, because I had a buddy who would do street preaching with his church. So I kind of started that way, which is a very different environment than here. And it's really different than here too. It's probably not as effective here, but when I was in England, that was how I started. And then I think the first time I ever preached in a church was my home church here. Mark Hazen, who is the recent hire for FBC, he asked if I would preach when I was home my first summer from Bible college. And I think I preached on Romans 13, which is about submitting yourself to governing authorities. And so it's a little bit of faith and politics, which is interesting. Yeah. That's kind of where I started. My first sermon in a church would have been 22.
Okay.
And then I started preaching at some churches in England kind of later that year. And so had some cool experiences there. So did a fair bit of preaching in England. And then when I came back home, that's when I started doing it more often. Campus ministries, you talked about that.
Yeah.
So I had a few times where I preached at some campus ministries at SVSU and places like that too. Yeah.
Awesome. And then obviously got into ministry full time, more on the worship side to begin with, and then eventually became
I also for a little while was at an organization. It's actually a Catholic organization. I got asked to fill in for a chaplain role because someone had injured themselves, and they said, "Hey, can you fill in for a Sunday?" And I actually ended up filling the chaplaincy role for 9 months. Cool. So I got to preach on a regular rhythm then too, which is cool. But
well, that's awesome. You do a great job, and
Thanks,
we
man.
sure are glad to have you here at FBC. So I got to tell you, I was prepping for the podcast a little bit, right? And my kids, they had some friends from FBC.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so they were like, "Wait, you're doing the podcast, and you get to ask Joe some questions?" And I said, "Yes." That meant they had a lot of suggestions for me about different questions I should ask you. Okay. So I'm not going to take most of their suggestions.
Okay. Sounds good.
But
that makes me nervous.
One of them in particular, Chuck, he wanted me to ask you this random question. Okay. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
What is your favorite gas station food?
Okay. Well, is it what I normally would get or what I would get if I would? So I typically try to be more health conscious the last several years. Yep. So I eat whatever a squirrel would eat. That's usually what I eat. So nuts and things like that are usually where I would go. Or meat sticks are pretty good. Yeah. That's probably my go-to.
All right.
Although lately, Joyride has been my most recent obsession.
There you go.
My family happened to watch some of was it Ryan Trahan 50 State thing? And then we started making Joyride runs. So
there you go.
I don't know if we'll get sponsored or anything, but it is the cherry berry ropes are delicious.
Okay, there you go. Perfect. Yeah. Now, if you had to pick something that was like a hot food item at a gas station, that slice of pizza, that roller dog, what?
I have a joke that I'm going to save it. It's probably not appropriate for the podcast. I'll just say most of those, they're probably great. And I appreciate those finely run establishments. Right. I just know that I will run to the bathroom if I have those items. So I'll just say that.
So you'll just stick to something that's prepackaged from the aisle.
Optimally, yes.
Okay. All right. That's good. All right. Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll jump in. We'll
Okay.
get into a little bit of last Sunday and talk through some things. So, so you kicked off by talking about how we're living in tumultuous times. You said it feels like things are spiraling out of control. And at least for our lifetimes, right, it feels like things are way worse than ever. I mean, I understand that. I feel that. But give us a little bit of context. When we think biblically, right?
Oh, yeah.
Historically, I mean, is this crazy? Is this out of the norm?
That's a great question. I think that culture and society, there's an ebb and a flow to the way that if you're somebody who's a student of history, and I don't by any means feel like I'm a historian.
Sure.
I like a lot of the biblical history, and so I try to lean into that a little bit, but I'm not great with history. But when you look at the reality of the world we're in, there's just seasons that are tumultuous, and that's just the way it is. And that's not anything that's different. I would say that theologically, I preached a whole series on this, but I do believe we're living in the last days.
Right.
Those 5 references to the last days, which is the time between the 2 advents of Christ,
Right.
Living in the last days. And so that's going to be times that are tumultuous.
Right.
So, we are able to see now that it's a unique season, I think, by comparison to the last several years, but I referenced COVID. That was a pretty tumultuous
Sure.
time, I think, in our country.
Yeah.
And you look at the course of history, I mean, if you were to ask, Christians under the Armenian genocide, right? I mean, it's like you look at, there are times where you're like, oh my goodness, this
Right.
is, by comparison, some of what we're dealing with is small potatoes, if
Yeah.
I'm being honest.
Right.
Or you look at Christians under the Roman Empire,
Sure.
they're being fed to lions. And so
The Assyrians.
I mean, absolutely.
that was-
Yeah. And then look at biblical history, with Israel and just what happened with,
Right.
anyways.
Yeah.
So we are living in tumultuous times. I don't, when I say that historically that's very common, I'm not trying to reduce the plight that I think our
Right.
country is in right now with
Right.
how difficult things are, but to frame it in context, as you said, this is to be expected.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of just the overarching world we live in, as I shared under the fall.
Right.
So,
Yep.
so to frame it up historically, yes, it's not necessarily, it shouldn't surprise us.
Right.
But I also don't want to diminish that we're going through a big season.
Yeah,
in this.
yeah, we shouldn't. Yeah, it doesn't mean just get over it, but it
Sure.
certainly, yeah, in the grand scheme of things. But it is, as you said. I mean, man, it's the fall. It's the product of the fall. It's not new, really in any way.
Right.
As much as it might feel that way, very much for us, especially depending on our age. Maybe the last really, besides COVID, which was unique, but maybe civil rights times in the United States were very tumultuous, I would say, for sure. But a lot of us don't have those experiences, so it's kind of interesting. But even with that, it doesn't change the fact that, especially in America, right, there is a lot going on. So
Sure.
I want to know, the division that exists is so significant.
Sure.
As a pastor, what concerns you most?
That's a really big question. I feel like I'm maybe going to be insufficient to answer this off the cuff a little bit. What concerns me most, I think, in light of the division is, and maybe some of the impetus for why we chose the pivot that we did, is that through all this, we're losing sight of Jesus. I would just say that the idea of the ethic of Jesus and what it means to live as followers of Jesus in the world, I think we tend to lose sight of that when things are shaky. And I think even just with the way that things are so polarized, we often allow lenses to be placed in front of our eyes to see the world and respond. And when the lens isn't Christ, I think that we tend to distort certain things about reality. And so for me, it's through all this, I'm concerned for our country. And I'm in particular, I feel like I have a responsibility to help shepherd our congregation and myself, and my family toward looking at this in a way that reflects Christ and centers everything on Jesus.
Right.
So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, and that's kind of really specific to the church, honestly, because we talk about how to expect people who don't know Christ to have that lens is kind of ridiculous.
Sure.
Like, it'd be silly to think in that way. So, but for those that do, right? Like,
Yes.
it is concerning when we lose sight of what's at the apex, what's most important, what's primary.
For sure.
And
And in
so-
1 Corinthians, when I preached that was Paul's point. Why would we judge unbelievers?
Right.
We are the people with transformed hearts.
Right.
We are the people who've died to an old way of life and been raised with Christ.
Right.
and we're seated in the heavenlies. Paul talks about it. So the reality is we should be the ones
Right.
who are living under the rule and reign of Jesus
Right.
in the midst of tumultuous times.
Yeah, I think we'll get to salt and light in a little bit, but
Sure.
that's that same concept too,
Yeah.
right? Where the church is salt and light, and so it's got to be different. It's got to be unique.
Yeah,
it's got to stand out.
Mhm.
So that's good. Good. So you talked a little bit. You said, I believe strongly in the sovereignty of God. And you kind of unpacked that for a second. And then you said, at the same time, though, there's also satanic forces at work.
Yeah.
Right? Both those things are true. Can you talk a little bit more about how both of those realities exist at the same time?
Yeah, this is a common thing. I mean, that there are these tensions that exist in the Bible all over. We talk about that quite a bit.
Yep.
Did we even talk about that last week? We might have.
We talked about some of the tensions.
Yeah, I shared about how sovereignty and human responsibility and how those things are at work. We know. I think the way I described it on Sunday was that part of this overarching rule of God, He has allowed this limited rule and reign of evil forces here.
Right.
There's a shelf life to that. It will
Right.
not last forever. That's part of the whole beauty of what we pressed into with Revelation 11. But the reality is, God allows for the way the world is to be functioning and governing in such a way, but it's limited, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, nothing happens outside of God's control. We want to affirm some of these major truths. Nothing
Right.
happens outside of His control. There's nothing that surprises God. He is supreme and sovereign in all things.
Right.
And so,
Yeah, and that analogy of the battle versus the war. Sometimes people refer to that, right?
Sure.
We can have confidence because the war has been determined. Jesus
Absolutely.
has won. It is finished.
Absolutely.
Right. The battle today, our daily battle, our
Right.
daily things that we walk through. We lose sight of that sometimes, but
Right.
but both of those things kind of exist at the same time.
And through the resurrection of Jesus, the enemy has been defeated in part, right?
Right.
Because Christ now rules and
Correct.
reigns in the heavens, and He defeated death and sin. But the fullness of His rule and reign will be actualized
Yeah.
at His return, which is
yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's awesome. So you mentioned it. We're living in the last days. I actually
Yeah.
was thinking about that too.
Oh,
A
cool.
previous series of ours, which is awesome. That time between Jesus' first and second comings, things aren't going well. Tumultuous times, satanic forces at work, divisions out of control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then we read Revelation 11.
Yeah.
And so we come to kind of the text that you kind of centered your message on.
Sure.
And it reminds us that Jesus is coming back. And that when Christ returns, you said it this way, the kingdom of this earth will become the kingdom of our Lord and His Christ. And on that day, the nations will no longer rage. And so that is something we should be looking forward to,
Sure.
right? I think when we did that series, Living in the Last Days, that was very compelling to me because I sometimes don't have enough sight on what is to come and how much I should be looking forward to that day. And
Yeah.
it's really important as Christians that we should be looking forward to that. But let's just talk a little bit more about the comfort that can be found when we think about what is to come. How does that bring us comfort in this current age?
Well, yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd say about that is we Christians, we have a perspective that is bigger, right? We do not believe that the world as it is all there is.
Right.
We are able to get our head above kind of our situation, our circumstances,
Right.
and see we know the end of the story, right?
Yeah.
So for people who don't have the same worldview, what they see in front of them is all there is.
Right.
We are able to see the hand of God at work in the midst of hard times, but to know that there's an ultimate fulfillment in the end where
Right.
He is going to reconcile all these things.
Yeah.
And He is going to come to right every wrong and to establish the fullness of His rule and reign. And so that enables us to not live with this mindset where what we see is what we get. And so we're going to, kind of grab a hold of the things that we can in this life because
Sure.
this is all we have. No, we have the heavenly perspective that we can let go of these things in this life.
Right.
Knowing that in the age to come that there is more at stake. There's the fullness of joy that we have as we look forward to the fullness of Christ's rule and reign.
Right. The presence of the Lord is the fullness of joy, right?
Absolutely.
It's
So
awesome.
so the resurrection, the hope of heaven, that should be something that transforms the way that we live in the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's how we can look at texts from the Bible that talks about our challenges that we walk through today as light and momentary afflictions.
My goodness.
That's such a strong phrase to think about when we're walking through the most difficult of times in this earthly life. But when we have the context of eternity,
Yeah.
it really just shifts that focus, hopefully, right? Because that's why. Otherwise, you read that text and you're offended.
Exactly.
Because you're like, wait a second, this isn't light or momentary.
Right.
It's a big deal.
And is it Peter who talks about, and after a little while, like he kind of even refers to like, well, this is the totality, like what we, 70 years or however long we live,
Right.
or 80, 90, that's a long span of time. But like in the grand scheme of eternity, that's nothing.
Yeah.
It's a drop in the bucket. And
Yeah.
so after this little while of suffering, these light and momentary afflictions, they're temporary, they're transient, they're fleeting.
Yep.
It allows us to get our head above the water and just, trust in the Lord, which is great.
It's awesome. My kids probably get tired of me saying it, but one of the things we say in our house is, okay, 30,000 years from now,
Yeah.
let's think about this thing that seems like a big deal right now.
Right.
But 30,000 years from now, how big of a deal is this going to be?
Right.
And it's pretty often that you're not even going to be remembering it. Right. So trying to have that bigger mindset a little bit of eternity is really important. And that's why there's so much hope found with that, because we know we have the bigger picture, and that Jesus is coming back. Revelation 11 celebrates that, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So you had 3 points this week, right? And I think you probably threw people off a lot this week because you gave them all 3 points at one time.
I deviated from my normal course.
Yeah, what you're thinking.
I really do the same thing every week, Nate. I don't know if people know this, but like there's a pretty clear formula. You would know it from the preaching practicum.
Yes.
I don't get too adventurous, but yes, I went out on a limb and just laid them all out.
Yes.
Yeah.
But 3 really strong points, which is good. I just want to kind of take a few minutes to kind of dig into each one of those maybe and spend a little time on them. So first of all, you said that Christ should reign in the church.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a pretty obvious statement, right? I think it seems like it.
Right.
But then you ask this question, what happens when the church is raging? Because you were talking about the nations raging, which we find in Psalm 2 and in Revelation 11. So you said, what happens if the church is raging? And I just love that question, because if we're being honest, there's been quite a lot of that lately. Like, we're just being honest. What do you think is the root cause of the church raging, and what are the implications of that?
I think it's, so what I would say is this, Christ is the head of the church, and he does reign, right? So we can take that. I kind of phrased it, that Christ should reign here is because we should be living out the rule and reign of Christ here. We know that in the age to come, right, the fullness of his rule and reign will be consummated.
Right.
But part of it is we look at the way that the world is, and I think we focus on the things in this world, and sometimes we allow that to take us off track a little bit. And in some ways, the raging, I don't want to overstate this. In some ways, it's functional atheism. What I mean by that is, if God is not sovereign, if Jesus isn't reigning, then we should be raging. But in the church, we should be fearful. Like, so you think about these things like anxiety, or I just briefly touched on it, and I'm sure that maybe some of that might be later points, but these emotions of fear or that we often have, these are kind of a functional lack of faith, right? That if Jesus isn't reigning, we should be fearful. If Jesus doesn't have a plan, we should be concerned about the future.
Right.
If Jesus isn't in control ultimately of everything, then we should be anxious. Right. And if he's not taking his creation somewhere, then we should be depressed, because there's no hope for the future.
Right.
So the idea of what it looks like for Christ to reign here is it's recognizing like who is on the throne and who are we submitting to. And we tend to lose sight of that. And I think part of it is just being part of the society at large. When Israel was driving out the nations, and I'm not trying to go to Old Testament here, they're driving out the nations, the purpose was so that way they weren't influenced so much by the nations, right? But they were able to be a light to the nations, right? So there's a separation from, but also an engagement with.
Right.
It wasn't like the Bible, the Old Testament, the goal was, hey, you want to drive out the nations and never have anything to do with them.
Right.
God's intention was for Israel to be a light to the nations.
Right.
And so to steal from that and just kind of bring it into the church a little bit today, we are in the world, but we're not of the world.
Right. Yep.
And that
Not
distinction is important, where we need to go, hey, we need to be distinct from and try to engage with in a way
Right.
that's responsible. And so I think when we lose sight of that and we just kind of look at the world, we tend to just conform
Right.
to the nations around us,
Right.
right? Is what we see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So then that's dangerous, right? Because the church is the gathering of God's people.
Sure.
And so when we lose sight of Christ and we lose sight of what he's done, what he's accomplished, it makes it really difficult. The church starts to blend in
Sure.
much more with the broader culture around
Right.
it. And you just were alluding to that concept of light. Same thing with the salt and light we were
Right.
talking about a few minutes ago, but it's that same concept. And so if it doesn't stand out, if it's not unique
Sure.
for the hope that is found in the darkest of times, it loses its ability
Sure.
to be something that people are drawn to,
Sure.
and something that the broader world, which needs that hope of Jesus, no longer is looking toward. So,
And I think also part of that whole first section about Christ reigning in the church is we also tend to see everything going on, and we look for answers or ultimate solutions. We look for them in ways that are more earthly. And I don't think that Christians should just reject the system, the world, the culture we live in. I don't think that
Right.
at all. Right? There's a way to responsibly engage in that, but I think in the eyes of the world, it's like, hey, we need to elevate this leader or this person or this policy or this agenda. This is going to solve our problems in this country, and we should have a better perspective on the reality of the brokenness and the way it is, and what we should be focusing on is Christ, centering ourselves in the church on Christ, and knowing that it's His transforming work and the work of the gospel and the advancement of the gospel is what this world needs.
Right.
And sometimes it gets a little wonky in times like this. So
yeah, I mean, the gospel is what will be attractive to people. Like if we're consistent with the gospel,
right.
And if God is at work in their hearts, right, that will be sufficient. We don't need a lot of other stuff.
Right.
We just need to preach Christ crucified and the grace that He brings, right? So that's awesome. Cool. So point number 2 was that Christ should reign in our homes, right? So kind of shifting a little bit outside of the church into our kind of personal home lives. You said that we are called to make disciples of all nations, and the easiest place to do that is in our homes. It's a great place to start, right? We talked about not allowing our devices to raise our children and the challenges that comes with all of that, and that our home should be a refuge from the world, but a witness to the world. Same thing, a little bit of in, not of kind of concept as well. If you could give new parents a little bit of advice on raising Christ-centered children, what would that center around?
Well, I'm not an expert, so let me start there. If you find an expert, please have them come to me and help me. So I want to make sure I'm not posturing myself as the consummate expert. I've still got some little ones in the home, so we're still,
Yeah, your oldest is in
my
high school?
oldest is in high school now.
That's crazy.
Yep.
And your youngest
my
is?
youngest is a first grader.
How old is May?
May is 6.
6, 7, like?
No, pretty good. Nice work, Nate. Way to all circle that back.
You're welcome.
That's great. So I've got kids kind of still in the some young and some that are getting older now. And one of the things I'll start by saying with young parents out there, we don't have the ability to transform young hearts.
Right.
That is a work of the Lord.
Absolutely.
We can be stewards to seek to the book of Proverbs says, raise up a child in the way they should go and they won't depart from when they're older.
Right.
Proverbs speaks in generalities.
Right.
That's a principle
Yeah.
that when the course of the world, the way it normally works, that is true, generally speaking. It's not a guarantee. There's not a magic wand and you can guarantee that. So, pray for the heart of your children. Start there. That's really important. Also understand that life is busy and complex, and you do what you can, do the best you can, give yourself some grace. But there's a few things that are just real practical, and I guess I could start there. I would say prioritize the community of faith that you're in. It's a place where your kids are being formed, where you are being formed. It's a habit, a pattern for your family.
Yeah.
I realize things come up on Sunday, so I'm not even overly rigid on that. I understand that.
Yeah.
But it should be prioritized in the home, because the communities of faith, the church is the place where faith is formed, right? So discipleship is formed in the church, and we believe that very strongly, and we're going to be talking more about that in the next series a little bit. We believe that's important. So prioritize your gathering on Sundays. And then outside of that, I would just say, don't parse out the work of raising your kids to follow Jesus to the world or to anybody else.
Right.
That is our responsibility. And if you're somebody who's like, man, I don't know that much about the Bible, that's okay.
Yeah.
You can start you can read the children's Bible with your kids and learn as you read.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
The Jesus Storybook Bible.
Oh, man,
so good.
Great.
It's
Yeah,
so
there's
good.
so many good.
For
Big Picture
adults.
Storybook Bible. Yeah, there's a lot of really good ones. So take time to do that. And the only other practical thing I would say is, especially as kids get older, just find incremental ways to just do that in doses. And so I've by no means done that perfectly. I drive my kids to school every day. The 5-minute drive is always I try to, if there's nothing else going on, nothing else popping off, then we try to just center around Jesus. Like just really simply, we take that drive and we might memorize a verse or talk about a theme from the Bible, but just a few minutes just to redeem that time. And if you can do an evening thing too, pray before meals, and sit at the dinner table and or pray before bedtime. That's great. But it's a tough task. Raising kids is hard. We are reliant fully upon the Lord for his redemptive work and the heart of our children. We should be praying for it, but we also should be laboring to that end.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love what you talked about, own that responsibility, right?
Yeah.
We, as a ministry, we absolutely want to wrap our arms around families.
Yeah.
We work really hard to make FBC kids and FBC students really dynamic ministries, and they are, by the way.
Yeah, we're blessed.
We are very blessed. But those aren't meant to be the primary drivers to get your children's faith moving, right? Those are kind of supplemental to what's happening on a regular basis in your home. So it's really important. That partnership exists between families, parents, and the church for sure. So I think that's super important. I just want to add one little thing that I think is important. Is just, make faith real, right? Like, I think as parents, the more that we can model to our kids that we are sinners saved by grace, the better off we're going to be, right? Like we're going to need to ask them for forgiveness sometimes. We're going to need to be able to say to them, I did that wrong. I led you wrong in that way. I lost my anger or I lost my control. I was angry, like whatever it looks like, but just having those real conversations, make faith real.
That's so good.
I just think that's important to do that stuff and be out in front of them, live out your faith in front of them. I think that's a core component as well.
Yeah. And to that end, I think, I've realized some of the moments that were the biggest spiritually in formation for my kids were the moments when I confessed or repented or apologized, because that's important, for them to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So really good things. But Christ should reign in our homes. So important that we prioritize that in our lives. So third point then is Christ should reign in our hearts. Christ should reign in our hearts. Absolutely true, of course. If you really want to make a difference in this world, you have to start by dying to it. That was a great line that you said on Sunday. If you really want to make a difference in this world, you have to start by dying to it. What does that look like?
It's a big topic. I would say, when we read Paul and he talks about that, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Yeah. When he says, for me to live is Christ, it's a way of us understanding that the way that the world is, there are always things that are going to be competing loyalties. Always. A part of the brokenness of the world, they talk about the enemies, it's the world, the flesh, and the devil. We have a fallen, cursed world. I've got a sin-cursed flesh, and we have the enemy, right? And so because of these things, stuff is going to be always vying for our allegiance, vying for our affections, trying to draw us in and yield to these things. And I think I shared in the message, the world overpromises and underdelivers. Part of dying to the world is an understanding that I am going to submit myself to Christ and recognize that I'm going to surrender the parts of me that would be compromising that. It doesn't mean that we throw our hands up and say, all right, I'm done with this world. Like, if you have a job, show up to work on time.
Right.
Like, provide
Right.
for your family. Like, if
Yeah.
it's not a stepping away. There's responsible ways to be part of the world. But it's understanding that our ultimate loyalty and allegiance is in the one who died for us.
Right.
And he is the one who's given us this new life. And so now our life, I've been bought with a price. And so because of that, I now have an opportunity to live a new kind of way, and I belong to Jesus, and my life is his. Right. And what King Jesus wants me to do with my life, that stuff is what is the priority,
Right.
And the way he calls me to live this life, and how I'm to engage in the world, that's what I submit to,
Right.
and nothing else. And so I think that that's kind of what I meant by dying to the world.
Sure. Sure. We wrapped up the service singing Abandoned, but then they finished that song with I Surrender All, right?
That's great.
Right. It's just a classic song. But really kind of what we're talking about here, just, hey, Jesus, I'm willing to let you have it all, whatever that looks like. It's to live for you. It's
Right.
a very big concept
Oh, my goodness,
and challenging, and part of what we try to walk out every single day of our lives. To pretend like we've ever arrived there would
Right.
be probably ridiculous, but just something to always be striving for, that sanctification process, right? Yeah, awesome. Colossians 3, you quoted as well. Paul is talking there, and he says to clothe ourselves in Christ, and then he says, let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. And I think that's so important. We started with tumultuous world, and how that's probably leaving us feeling not very much like a peace inside of us, because we're watching what's happening around us. It's so easy to forget about that. You said when we allow our minds to be filled with so much garbage is what you talked a little bit about. And you talked a little bit about this decision you made last week to get rid of some social media, all social media, for a little while, so that you could just focus, because you said it was not drawing you closer to Jesus.
Sure.
So I want to just talk a little bit about that concept a little bit. So, it seems to me that our feeds are radicalizing us in a lot of ways, and I know you agree with that.
Yeah.
You said that they entrench us into our own ideologies, and they vilify anyone who might have a different perspective. And then you said rage keeps us engaged. All awesome, true statements that we really need to be thinking about. So what are some practical ways that we can let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, so to that, there's a lot to that question.
Yeah, there's
but
a
the
lot going
idea
on
of thinking through Psalm 1, one of my favorite Psalms, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on that law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yield its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. The whole point there is that the things that we allow to fill our mind often shape, the direction of our life and shape the way that we live. And when we're meditating on Christ and on His Word and on the gospel, I think it's a practical way to allow that peace of Christ to rule in our hearts, and even when we, prayer for the things that we're anxious about, that's when Paul talks about that peace that surpasses all understanding, that will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. That's through when we elevate those things we're concerned about, give them to the Lord, what did Martin Luther say? Something like, pray and let God worry about it. Like it's kind of this idea of like we can release these things that we're holding on to and say that we have a sovereign God who's in control, and I want to submit to Him and trust Him for everything. And I think that brings comfort. That brings that peace. And I think that that's a practical way of how we do it. And to go into the whole social media thing, I mean, there's so much I could say about that on a personal level. Like I'm not really into it so much, but I do think, there's a reality to the way that those things work. When I talked about rage keeps us engaged, that's how these tools have been designed.
Right.
These things, social media, which has been, I don't know how old, 20 years. Like I got Facebook late, all that stuff, right? But like 20 years-ish, it's been around. These things have been given to society. We've not been given a framework to see how these influence us. We've not been given a playbook for how to use these responsibly. And we've just been given them. And the reality is, especially now, even with technology and what's true and what's not true, the way it works is that we have these perspectives, and the algorithms curate for us certain things.
Yep.
And that enables us to not have a breadth of perspective, but to kind of continually go down a rabbit hole, which if someone else's algorithm, my neighbor's, is different.
Right.
Now the wedge between me and my neighbor is just that much wider.
Yes. The whole thing about social media, right, is that it will give you more of what you want.
Oh, for sure.
And we just have to recognize that.
And there are good things. There are redemptive things about it. There is an outlet to preach the gospel and do things like that. I understand some of those things. I would just suggest, if we look back over the last 20 years, if you were to ask me net positive, or net negative, if this is a gain or a loss, I would say loss.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
Yes. The benefit of having social media is I can show you what I had for lunch today when I take the selfie.
Right.
I get to see people from high school that I haven't talked to in 20 years.
Yeah,
That's cool. And I'm being a little bit sarcastic.
Sure.
There are good things. And again, the gospel focus can be good. But man, it's polarized our society.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my big concerns about the consumption of this is we are now getting further and further apart in our society.
Yeah.
And there's some level where that's daunting, because this is a powerful tool that, our little church in Frankenmuth and Pastor Joe's sermons, but if I can have a little bit of an influence just over our people to say, hey, is this drawing us closer to Jesus?
Right.
Or is this pushing us and to our neighbor?
Right.
When Jesus talked about loving your neighbor,
Right.
The man went to justify himself. Lord, I've kept all these commandments.
Yeah.
What must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he said, I've done these things.
That. Yep, check.
He says, but who's my neighbor? Right? Expecting Jesus to say, well, your neighbor is a fellow Jew. And, the kind of the adage for the Jewish people at the time was like, yeah, you love your neighbors and hate your enemies, right? Because the fellow Jewish people were your neighbors. They were the same covenant people, and the outsiders were enemies. And Jesus walks through what the Samaritan story is, that your neighbor is actually someone who is drastically different than you, radically different. And what does it look like to love them?
Right.
And we also know that's a bigger picture of the gospel.
Yeah.
Because I was radically opposed to Jesus.
Right.
We're not even in the same wavelength. He is holy and perfect. I was a wretch. Mm-hmm. And Christ looked at me, and in love, he sacrificed himself for me. Mm-hmm. He died for me. He loved his enemies. Mm-hmm. And that is the essence and so much of the gospel, that when we live out this ethic in the world of following Jesus, that's what we want to do. But social media has really polarized things. It's pulled us apart.
Yep.
And so, practically about letting the peace of Christ rule, I would say we need to just be thoughtful about that. We need to be responsible. And I would even say, and now I'm going to rant here, so if I hope it's okay. But when we think about this, I talked a lot about Sunday morning about the idea of the consumption of social media, what we fill our minds with.
Right.
Our contribution to social media is also very important. Like, part of letting the peace of Christ rule would mean that we need to be thoughtful about what we're doing in the world.
You might argue more impactful,
oh my
right?
Goodness, because what I would say is, when we, I'm going to get explicit.
Okay.
So I hope this is all right. If I lean to the right and I say, well, the left is evil.
Yep.
Okay. Or if I lean to the left and I say, everybody on the right spews hate, right? Those are very blanket general statements.
Right.
Okay. If I can unpack that for a second, one, you are making a statement about half of the population.
Right.
So be cognizant of that.
Yep.
Two, I believe in the image of God. Every person has intrinsic dignity because they've been made in the image of God.
Right.
And so to vilify to that level, or dehumanize, or to use our words to kind of weaponize and to attack somebody and strip them of their humanity, I think is dangerous. Like we want to think through this from a different perspective a little bit. And so when we say those things, I think that we, maybe unknowingly, we are complicit in contributing to the temperature of the society. When we make these statements and we put out these posts that fuel the polarization, I think we need to be think a little more thoughtfully as followers of Jesus about our level of culpability here.
Right.
That we are peacemakers.
Yeah.
Right. We have the ministry of reconciliation.
Right.
And we may be, the only person, some of the people maybe who are following us on social media, we may be their only Christian friend. Right. We just got to think through that a little bit and be careful. And then I would also just say with being complicit, in the way that things are right now, when we contribute to that temperature of the world and contribute to the polarization, and someone who's unhinged rises up and does something like what just happened, I don't want to contribute toward that, right? And people take the things that we say and they're being radicalized. And I think we, on some level, we're being polarized. So we just need to be thoughtful. And I just, rant over, I guess, and I realize that might be, some people that might not agree with that. I just think I want to be really thoughtful about that tool. And I'm concerned about it, really.
But the Bible does speak to peace being something that should be sought after, right? I mean, and that we find it in Christ.
So far as it depends on me,
right?
I want to pursue peace with those around me.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was prepping some of these questions, and I just, for whatever reason, my mind went to Philippians 4, right? Because we think about where do we let our minds live? What do we put into our minds? What do we allow? What thoughts do we allow to be in our minds, right? And so Paul talks about that a little bit. First, he says, of course, rejoice in the Lord always, again, and say rejoice. Then he says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. That sounds very peaceable. He goes on, he says, Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And then he says what? Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. It just makes me think about how often am I putting that filter on what I'm allowing to be in front of my eyes or in my mind? Am I putting them through this litmus test that Paul has given us about the things that we should allow to spend our time in our minds? Because again, right before that, he said that peace comes when we get our focus correct, right? When we start taking those other things out of the picture, that will help us to be centered on the peace that is found in Jesus. So,
and I would even just say too, that's part of that is it doesn't mean that we have to put our head in the sand and never speak out. Right. But I think there's value in having Christ, the lens of Christ and the gospel inform us, and we should speak out about things that we feel like are harmful for society or ills or things that are blatantly unbiblical. We want to be thoroughly biblical in our framework of the way that the world should function. Right. So I'm not saying we can't do that. I'm just saying the way in which we approach that must be marked by love and by peace and by grace, because that's the way that God has told us we are to function as followers of Jesus. And in a world that's raging, that is going to be something that is far more powerful than us just, it's attractive to people that we are living at peace, and in the midst of everything that's happening. And part of it too is there is this sense sometimes of people who maybe what I would call have an over-realized eschatology of things. And that's a fancy way of saying, like the golden age is here now kind of thing. Like we need to procure that and get that. And it's like my theology would tell me that, there's going to be a brokenness. I'm going to seek, as we read in the Old Testament, the peace of Babylon. I'm going to seek its well-being. I'm going to try to participate in that. Right. But I'm also going to know that heaven is not going to be something that I can secure for myself. Right. That is something that Christ will accomplish. Right. And I want to live with that understanding,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, I think you've already answered this a little bit, but you were talking a little bit about how truth is still important. The truth of the Bible is still important. Helping people to understand the way that God has designed our lives to be lived is still important, right? But I'll just ask this question, and you can maybe talk a little bit more. We've talked a little bit about it, but radicalism is a real threat today on both sides. That's just the truth. But Jesus was described as radical too. Oh. So what are some ways that Jesus challenged the status quo, and how do we follow his lead today?
Yeah, I think he challenges the status quo because I think it's part of that upside down kingdom I talked about in the first week, right?
Yeah.
And I think I shared the world we live in is actually upside down.
Right.
Upside down. The kingdom is the right side up kingdom, the kingdom of God.
Right.
It's just from our vantage point, phenomenologically, we see it the wrong way.
Right.
So I think the truth is Jesus challenges the overarching, view of the world and the status quo, as you've said, because he says things that are so counterintuitive. He even talks about the way that the rulers of this world they lord it over people. That should not be so of you, he says, right? He talks about the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And those who are greatest in the kingdom, they humble themselves. And so I think, the radical approach of Jesus, as opposed to the radical approaches of the world, are completely polar opposite, right? We don't engage in ways that are violent or insisting on our own way. We love and we sacrifice and we serve. And I would even suggest, if people want to think through ways in which to be a Christian in a world that's raging, look at the first couple centuries of the church. Mm-hmm. You see these people who are now empowered by the Spirit to go and share the gospel in a very hostile place.
Right.
And the way in which they do so is they do it, they suffer gladly for Christ. They serve one another. They love one another. Christians were known for being peaceable and for being loving and for being gracious in a hostile world.
Right.
And it was so countercultural, but that was what accelerated the advancement of the gospel in the Roman Empire and throughout the ancient world. And I think in many ways, we can lose sight of that at times.
Yeah.
So when it comes to things, like truth and all that, right? We speak the truth in love. You talked about that, but we want to think through the way that Jesus spoke truth. He was full of grace and truth, right? And so the way that we communicate what's true is we do it graciously and loving.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the upside down kingdom it's just so true, right? Like he did so many things, especially the established religious leaders of the time.
Yeah.
He did so much that was so opposite of what they were expecting, right? But he pursued people in loving, gracious ways. That's what he did, right? And it's just powerful, still in truth, yes, but in loving, gracious ways. It's just such a neat thing. I want to just circle back real quickly to, you were talking, the social media thing. You talked a little bit about take a walk in the grass. I think was one of the
touch some grass.
Do something like turn your screen off, right?
Yeah.
Maybe pick up your Bible, right?
Sure.
Maybe do some reading, make those choices. And I think, just practically speaking, those are, I just want people to really think about how can I maybe deselect some things, as you said, that are not drawing me closer to Jesus. So maybe I need to deselect some of those things, and then maybe just reselect some of the things that will draw me to him.
Sure.
Whether that be quiet time before God, whether that be time in the Word, whether that be time for worship, whether that be some sort of function of the church, right? Some sort of ministry of the church that we can be involved in, to be able to kind of have more Christians around us. Whatever that might look like, those are just really important things that we can be doing.
For sure.
To center ourselves around Christ, which will hopefully mean he's reigning in our hearts more and more all the time, right?
For sure.
My kids like the Josiah Queen song Dusty Bibles. It's kind of,
I'm familiar with that one, yeah.
But he just says we've got dust on our Bibles, but we've got brand new iPhones, and we wonder why we feel this way. We walk with our eyes closed, blind, leading blind folks. And I'm done with these idols and dusty Bibles. It's just, I think, fitting for what we're talking about right here, right? Like, we put these other things up, whether we acknowledge it or not. Every time we select them over something else, it is like selecting the idol. And so just keeping that balance is just super important.
Yeah, and I think, like I mentioned before, I don't want to completely, I'm not looking for us to get rid of our electricity and live in a hut. I'm not saying that, again, and some people might choose to do that. I'm not being critical of them either. God has a way of using technology for his glory.
Yeah.
He did it when Rome built roads.
Right.
what a perfect time for the church to be born, because now these people who write these letters can carry it on these roads all across the empire.
Correct. Yep.
Right? We saw it with the Gutenberg's printing press. Yep. For the first time, we can mass produce Bibles, and now that and we see this for every medium, every new piece of technology. God can redeem it for good, and He can use it for good. But Christians should just think responsibly about that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's the rhythms that we need to develop, and those habits that you mentioned that it might be hard to break from that. And I think, you remember just being a kid and like going outside and like being like, it wasn't like we had these things that were in our pockets that were always filling us with noise. And I think that there is just a need for us to return to some of those things a little bit and not lose sight of God's creation and the world that we have, and relationships and dialogue like this, and I even mentioned, dialogue from people who might have a different perspective,
Right.
There's health in that.
There is.
So especially when we're entrenched in, our own stuff with social media.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So those are the big 3 points. Super.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love, they were very practical, but very obviously centered around Christ, which was what you and I talked about when we decided that the pivot made the most sense. Was we just really wanted to center on Christ.
Sure.
And He is the foremost. He is the thing that we really need to be centered on. And so making sure that He's reigning in our church, in our homes, in our hearts is just super important for us all to remember. So I'm gonna read one kind of, as you were closing, you had the big idea, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of, if there's anything else you want to kind of share as we wrap up. But you just talked about the fact that we are not just citizens on earth, or I would say of America, right? We are citizens of heaven. We don't need to conform any longer to the pattern of this world, and we need to submit to King Jesus. So anything you want to just add as we kind of wrap up with that big idea?
Yeah, I just think, it's important for the church to be wise. By church, I mean followers of Jesus. We just want to be wise through this. And, the idea of being salt and light, like I said, there is a place for engagement in the world. Like, we should be standing out, certainly, but an agent of preservation, which is part of the idea of salt as well, to try to seek the benefit, the well-being of our society. And so we want to function in ways as Christians where we are... I believe in it's called the theology of vocation, right? That whatever you do, you can glorify God. If you're a plumber, you should do it to the glory of God, and you should share Jesus with your plumbing buddies. It's like whatever we do, we should engage. And so there are Christians who enter the sphere of the political realm, and they should engage, and they should use, their Christian ethic and values to try to enhance and shape the world around them. That's all good.
Right.
What I just don't want to do is invert that, right? I don't want to begin to, like I said before, the lens through which we view the world should be Christ. It should be the lens that shapes the way that we do everything else. I don't want to take my political position and be that my primary lens, and that's now how I view the gospel, or how I view, and I think sometimes we have a propensity toward doing that. And so it's centering ourselves on these things and realizing that Jesus wasn't born in America.
Right.
Like he wasn't, he didn't, have to register which party he wasn't. Jesus, the kingdom of God is not a partisan thing. And so let's allow the kingdom to shape all the other things we do. And let's just keep that the focus and the priority, and then be responsible in how we carry that out, and do it in ways that honor Jesus in all that we do, and not necessarily just, feel like we got to plant the Jesus flag in one corner or another. We just want to allow Jesus to be Jesus, allow His kingdom to be His kingdom. And it is not a kingdom of this world, it's a kingdom for this world. And when we see all these things swirling, the overarching hope is that when King Jesus returns, we will submit to His rule and reign, and the Jesus flag will be the only flag, and I long for that day.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Yeah, because at that point, the nations won't be able to rage anymore. It all will be restored, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
He is the Prince of Peace. And I look forward to the day when He, ushers in peace.
Yes. Well, awesome. I appreciate having this chance to chat a little bit about this. It's been really good. And I know that this message was challenging in a lot of ways. It really was. But I appreciate you really diving into it and being willing to tackle it for our church. I think it's really good. And so this has been a good chat.
I just one quick, I was just thinking as we're talking, and I probably should have added this to the end of my sermon. Isn't it cool too, at the end of Revelation, how you have this tree which bears fruit, and it's for the healing of the nations? I mean, that's our longing, right? Is for Christ to come and to just heal the brokenness that we're in.
Right.
And so, I don't know. Sorry, just popped my head, fired off. I had to chuck it out
exactly
there.
right, because a lot of us, I mean, I think all of us want that healing. Like that's
Absolutely.
a lot of what we're longing for, right? Is we see how broken things really are.
Yeah.
And so we get to long for that and hope that might come soon.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
hey, thanks for letting me ask you some questions.
Yeah, I appreciate this, Nate. This is awesome, man.
Yeah.
Are you going to be a regular on this podcast segment?
Maybe we'll see.
Awesome. Well,
All
hey,
right,
I
thanks for tuning in, everybody.
appreciate you guys. Thanks so much.
Yep.